All right. Welcome, everybody, to our second in the Tuesday Night Education series for this winter. I'm really excited. We have an all-star lineup this season. I'm really excited to bring you tonight how to keep your transceiver up to date. We're lucky to have Angela Haas and Mike Hattrop here. They are both working with PIEPS Black Diamond, and I'll tell you a little bit more about their relationship with them. But they also are both mountain guides and skiers in their own right and have a lot to say, a lot of collective experience here with many different transceivers and in many different mountainous regions. So really excited to have some great expertise from them. They're going to talk to us a bit about keeping a transceiver up to date, kind of the care and keeping of your avalanche transceiver. And then we'll do a little bit deeper dive into what an avalanche transceiver recall means and what those mandatory versus voluntary recalls are like and what you need to do and how to check to see if your device needs that. So I won't take much more time. I'm going to hand it over to Mike and Angela. Just so you all know, you are welcome to drop your questions into the Q&A at any time. In just a second, I'm going to enable the chat, so you're also welcome to drop questions into the chat. And also feel free to drop in the chat where you're tuning in from. We're always really interested to hear from folks where you live and where you're spending your winter. So maybe let us know in the chat if you'd like where you're spending your winter this year and whether you've taken an ARI course or what kind of avalanche education you have. So go ahead and drop those in just a minute when I enable the chat. And then we'll let Mike and Angela take it away. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'll mute and turn off my camera, and I'll be here in the background for tech support.
Give me 1 second as I share my screen. Angela, give me a thumbs up if you can see somebody. Awesome. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I maybe a quick introduction for Angela and I. I've been an AMGA ski guide since '99. And I worked for Black Diamond. I was the category director for ski, so worked with a lot with beacons and learned a ton about beacons, a lot more than I ever learned as a guide. So a different aspect of it, so super valuable. And now I work for a company called 11 Experience, super cool company. You should check it out, Google it. And I'll turn it over to Angela really quick. I've known Angela forever, and each time I go to a new company, I go and recruit her and drag her along with me. So she's been with me at K2 and then Fisher and now Black Diamond. So Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Hat. I'm at Mike Hattrop groupie primarily. Like Mike said, I follow him around wherever he goes. We actually started at Marmot before K2. And it's great now that we're both athletes at Black Diamond. Mike recruited me onto the Black Diamond team, which I'm super stoked for. And we last year ran a bunch of these avalanche interference training sessions together throughout the US with a bunch of pros. I'm an IFMGA guide. I past president of AMGA and instructor team member, and currently I'm on the board of the IFMGA and the vice president of the technical commission. And I'm deep into avalanche education as well. Psyched to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Angela. Okay, so I'll dive right into this. Just a quick overview. I'll go into a little bit of information on how transceivers work, just basic stuff, and then I'll turn it over to Angela, and she's going to take you through maintenance, some general stuff, and then firmware updates and just how to care for your beacon. And then she'll go into our app, which is really cool, and I think one of the coolest features about the beacon. And then she'll turn it back over to me. I'll talk a little bit about recalls and what to expect there. And then we'll talk about a quick group check, and then I'll pass it back over to Angela for interference. And then at the end, we've got plenty of time for Q&A. So jot down your questions and we'll address all those at the end of the presentation. So in terms of beacons, they essentially have two basic functions. and as I said that, I said beacons, which is actually incorrect. We should call them transceivers, although a lot of us in the industry still use beacon. A beacon really only sends a signal, whereas a transceiver sends and receives. So those are the two main functions of our avalanche transceiver: is one to send a signal, and the other is to receive a signal. And as you all know, we work on a 457 kilohertz for that signal now. And a little bit about the transceiver and how it's evolved over the last 15, 20 years. We now all have multiple antenna beacons, and all these every modern beacon, regardless of the brand, has three antennas. There's an X, a Y, and a Z. And an X is usually the longitudinal, the longest. It runs the length of your beacon. The Y is the width, and then the Z is the thickness. And the Z is only used for fine search. So if we look at this in sending mode, your transceiver only sends from one antenna, and it's usually the strongest. And some beacons, I know PIEPS and Black Diamond, if there's interference on one of the antennas, it will switch to the other antenna and send from that one. And some other brands do that as well. I don't think everybody does, but some do. And so think of your beacon, so it's only sending out in the X antenna in send mode. In receive mode, it goes back and forth between the X and the Y antenna. And that allows the beacon to give you a directional arrow and distance, because it kind of triangulates, so it can figure out where is this tone coming from. And Z, the little thickness, the antenna that's only the thickness of your beacon, only comes into effect when you get in to less than 5 meters. That's what you use for the fine search. So that's kind of the basics of the transceiver and how each of the antennas works. Coupling, this is a big one. You can see both these transceivers, the one in the middle that's sending the signal is directly in line with the beacon on top of the screen. Okay, so that's the best coupling, and that's where all the brands will give you the range. So if they say we've got a range of 60 meters, it's in that best coupling. And honestly, we shouldn't use best coupling, because when you go to worst coupling, it drastically shortens that range. So in my eyes, that best coupling is kind of your range is kind of a marketing number. When you think about the worst coupling, and I'll get to that slide in a second, but you can cut that range down in half. So if it's 70 meter range, you cut that to 35. If it's 60, down to 30, whatever it is, cut that range in half. And that's the functional range of your beacon, because you need to count on worst coupling, because you don't know how that person is buried. So if I go to the next slide, this is the next worst coupling when those beacons are at perpendicular to each other. So that won't pick up the beacon as far away. And if we go to the worst coupling, I didn't have a picture of a beacon on end, but if you can picture your beacon on end, that's the worst coupling. So it's just good to understand those, and understand that when you're doing a beacon check or a range check, it's a good idea to do it in best coupling, but then turn it to the worst coupling and see what happens to the range, because it will drastically reduce that functional range. The next thing about the beacon, so this is a graph of what the tone looks like coming out of the beacon. So each of these blue towers is, let's say this is a graph, that's the sound of the beep, okay? And then this dead space between the beeps is called the off key, and there's a standard for that. And each of these has a standard. And the look at the height as the frequency standard. That's 457 kilohertz. And the standard, the time that your beacon makes that sound, beep, beep, beep. The length of the beep, that's the pulse, and that has a time standard. That has to be at least 70 milliseconds and not more than 130. And then the space between the two beeps, the off key, that also has a standard. And that needs to be at least 400 milliseconds. And then the third standard is the period, which is the time from the start of the first beep to the start of the second beep. That cumulative time has a standard of at least 457 milliseconds, or 470, and not more than 530. So the other thing that's important to understand is every time you turn on your beacon, the length of the beep, the pulse, and the length of the period changes. They're all within that standard still, but the reason they change is because if you turn two beacons on and the signals overlap, then eventually you need that overlap to go away and heal. And by having a slightly different timing on each time, and it doesn't matter what beacon or from what brand, they all do this, it's variable. And each time you turn it on, it's going to shift that pulse to slightly different timing and the period to a slightly different timing, so that if you do get overlap, it will fix itself from that overlap and you'll be able to find both beacons. I'll turn it over to Angela before I go into recalls for a little maintenance.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we'll take it from here. And again, jot down your questions if you have any. You can put them in the chat and we'll get to them when we're done here. So general maintenance, it's really critical that you know your transceiver. Every transceiver's different. As Mike talked about, there's standards for certain parts of the transceivers, some of the electronics, but in terms of function, use, they're all different. So the important thing is to, really pay attention to the user manual. You can get it online. There's usually a quick start guide and then a more in-depth manual, but it's really important to review that because each transceiver is going to have subtle differences. And a lot of them will have some nice educational content inside. So batteries, one of the most important things here, they require absolute attention and diligence. You have to remove your batteries at every season. I'm guilty of not doing it on a couple of times. I ended up opening up my transceiver the beginning of the season and it was completely corroded. And this was an old Mammut 3000. And I sent it back and they basically said it isn't any good. The warranty's void because of user error. So it's critical that you take your batteries out at the end of every season and you check when you take them out for signs of corrosion. Because if you are going to send it back, that's the best time to send it back, like in, the end of the season when you've got all summer when you don't need it. Don't try to fix it yourself. These issues are absolutely not okay. And you can't like take a little piece of sandpaper, which I also tried to do once, and then I decided that wasn't a good idea. And you got to send it back. It's possible that they can repair it and replace the battery terminals, but they might just tell you, it doesn't function anymore, because not only are the battery terminals corrode, but the electronic connections to the terminals also begin to erode after time as well. So all manufacturers expect to get the transceivers back, and I'm sure they see a lot of corrosion, maybe not quite this bad, but it's important that they check it, and sometimes it's repairable, but it's going to lead to a lot more expense on your part if it isn't repairable, because you're going to have to purchase a new transceiver. So really just be diligent about that at the end of the season, and make sure you're even during the season, especially you live in a humid environment, open up that battery compartment and just maybe take the batteries out and just make sure that it's air drying, so it's not collecting any moisture in there, because that can really cause a lot of damage. We all ski with a lot of different partners. I prefer to ski with guides who do transceiver checks. Be diligent about doing your checks at the trailhead, but a good rule of thumb is, when you're at home, put your transceiver on and just turn it on then. And then when you get to the trailhead and you do your transceiver check, then yeah, you can turn it back off, do your battery check, all that kind of stuff. But I think a good rule of thumb, just so we know it's stored correctly where it's going to be and then it's turned on, is to just make that happen right away. And where I ski most of the time, I cross under, like 35 avalanche paths on the way to Red Mountain Pass. So it's not a bad idea to have your transceiver turned on even when you're driving sometimes. It has to be attached. I see this, people slipping up on this a lot, or really not paying much attention to it. It should be attached with the bungee that it comes with, either to the harness, which the manufacturers supply, or to a secure pocket with a lanyard. And here you can see a picture of a pocket that's got a dedicated transceiver clip here. And we're even recommending now to avoid plastic clips and just girth hitch that thing right to your, the tether inside of your pocket. The pocket needs to be not an externally sewed or glued pocket. It should be part of the pant, and the actual pocket side should be inside. BCA did they have a good article on their website about someone's transceiver that was actually ripped off with their pant pocket. They didn't die because their airbag deployed, but they found out later and their transceiver's completely gone. So, these attachments are absolutely critical. And if you're storing it in your pocket, there's a couple schools of thought, like where to store do I store it on my harness, or do I store it on your pocket? And a lot of professional users prefer to store it on the pocket, because a lot of us are carrying radios on our chests. You've got a lot of electronic interference, especially like if you're a ski patroller or a search and rescue professional, that you're wearing right here. It gives a degree of separation, having it on your pocket. But there's also a school of thinking like, well, if it's closer to my chest is closer to my airway, and they're likely to get to my airway faster. So there's a couple schools of thought, but if in doubt, you don't have a good pocket, put it in the manufacturer's harness and wear that under your most outer layer. Make sure I've seen a lot of like super short little lanyards. It's critical that your lanyard's adjusted so it's arm length, so it's 50 centimeters away. And that also accounts for interference when we're in search mode. So just make sure that lanyard length can get at least half a meter away from your body. These devices are very sensitive electronic devices, so it's really important to take good care of them and not drop them or jolt them, and just periodically check that, it's functioning exactly how it should. Clean it off with a damp cloth. No detergent is generally the recommendation, and store it completely dry in a protective case. I store mine in like a sunglasses case, and that's what I travel with it in. I used to keep it in a sock, but I find that like the sock ends up kind of getting tossed somewhere, and I didn't discern it enough from a protective case. So have a good way of storing it so it's just protected from jolts. When to replace your batteries. And there's a couple different options out there. A lot of transceivers will only use the alkaline batteries. Some will use alkaline or lithium batteries, and now some are USB charged batteries. So just make sure that your transceiver's programmed for whatever battery it's going to use. So if I knew I was wanting to go to like a super cold environment where a lithium battery might be a better choice, then when I put that lithium battery in there, I have to go to my settings and change that it's a lithium battery, because the device isn't going to just recognize that it's a different battery type. Go with the manufacturer's recommendations on when to replace your batteries. This is a screenshot from the PIEPS manual for the IPS, and they're recommending not changing it until it's like almost empty. Battery change recommended down here, which is pretty slow. I usually change mine out between 2/3 and a third. Batteries aren't that expensive, and it significantly is going to reduce the duration of my battery life. So good idea to carry an extra set of batteries in your pack. Oftentimes your ski partner might be low on batteries as well. It's a good idea also to check your terminals where the batteries attach in there. When I put batteries in my transceiver, I like to roll my hand over it and make sure the batteries aren't feeling loose in there and there's resistance against the terminals. Mike will talk about this PIEPS recall, and that was one of the issues, because standards and batteries aren't necessarily all the same. So all the manufacturers have different recommendations for service. PIEPS recommendation is one, that you register the device. That's absolutely critical. And then they can keep you updated as to when the latest firmware updates come out. And they certainly want you to use your device with the latest firmware. They'll send you an email. You'll get a notice on the app if you have a device that syncs with an app, that it's time for a firmware upgrade. Because they are sensitive electronic devices and they age, all this stuff ages over time, including the plastic that it's housed in. Most manufacturers will recommend to send the device back after 3 years for them to do a check, and then at 5 years. And then after that 5 years, they recommend every year. So I can bet, out of however many are you on this call, that some people have some transceivers that are probably exceeded 3 years and never gone back, and some that have exceeded 5 years and never gone back. So it's really important that you follow these guidelines, because these are very sensitive devices, and they're not all easily updated from device to device or using an app. Sometimes they do have to be updated by the manufacturers. So yeah, this is what PIEPS recommends. Send it back for service every 3 years, and then 5 years after the date of purchase, every year after that. The PIEPS app, this is one of, I think, the most unique things of our avalanche transceivers. And now we're going to see how high tech I can get here. I'm going to stop this screen share, and I'm going to start a new screen share on my phone. First time doing this today, so okay. Might take a moment here. There we go. And I'm going to run you through some of the features on the PIEPS app. So the app has a Bluetooth function. The device has a Bluetooth function. And if you hear some snorting, it's not me, it's my dog. That's Gromit. Okay, so this is the Bluetooth device, or the Bluetooth app. You can see it's got device manager, which is where we go in and we can do a lot of different things I'll run through. If you have a school or an avalanche education program or a guide service, ski patrol, and you have a fleet of PIEPS apps, and this goes all the way back through all the current PIEPS app that are out there, the Gen 2, 3 antenna devices on the market works for these. Then you can update your entire fleet very easily and document all that, which is really nice. It's got some training functions, which are really nice little scenario. You can create scenarios. You can change the axis. You can change which antenna's doing what. There's a bunch of practical knowledge here and different levels that you can go through. It's really just kind of a very clever app that's got a lot of things in here. It's got a beacon station, this art station where we could like set up our own like beacon basin and use as many devices as you want, and it's really easy to run. But for our purposes, what we'll look at now is this device manager. So you can see all these different PIEPS devices that I've registered. And right now I've got an IPS device here, and I'm going to set it up, turn it on with the Bluetooth enabled. Oh, I blew it. Some other apps, I think Ortovox also has a Bluetooth enabled device. I think the direct voice is Bluetooth enabled, but there's others out there on the market. This isn't totally unique to PIEPS, but I think what ours entails is pretty extensive and robust. So now I've got my transceiver onto Bluetooth, and there it's found it there. Now it's connecting. Now, so here I've got all the kind of basic information. The version here shows that it's up to date. My battery contact version is okay. That's because I've just received it back from the recall. And it's got a device check, which is, I think, one of the most unique features here. We can check our transceivers as often as you want, and this is really helpful if your clients are using the device. So now I'm going to run through what it's telling me to do on the device here. Press the mark button, press the scan button, press the function button, switch to search mode, speaker check. Yes, I heard a tone. And now here it runs through the complete check of all the functions of the device that they're okay. And if there was one that was red, it would prompt you to go through the check again. And so another neat thing here is I can download this certificate, and I can send that to my computer or wherever I'm storing my information that I want to keep track of on all of my devices. And I can do that for an airbag. I can do it for the iProbe and any of these other devices. Let's see. Oh, geez. So now, in addition to the device check, what you can do here is you can enable and change all the settings on your device, so you don't have to use the actual buttons and scroll through the kind of more antiquated screen of the avalanche transceivers. It's much easier to do here on a phone. There, if I wanted to change to lithium batteries, I could do that there. It's got different group check modes, which Mike will go into. I can change the time for auto revert to send, which if I'm not moving for 120 seconds, it will start emitting a send signal. It's got a backup mode. It's got advanced settings that I can change my marking range to 20 meters. And this is really useful for kind of like high level rescuers where you might have multiple scenarios or you're searching like from a helicopter or something, and you have a more of a complex scenario. For backcountry ski touring, 5 meters is perfect. It's got a deep burial recommendation. It's got a regular and detailed scan mode. The scan mode is a really unique feature that gives you kind of a mental map of where your where and how far away any of multiple burials will be. It's got analog mode. It's got the rest you can see right there. It's got an inclinometer, which is a pretty unique device, and pretty unique feature. And then let's see what else I've got. My advanced mode. I can reset to factory settings if I want to just like start a clean slate. It gives me how long my warranty is good for, where I purchased it, so on and so forth. So this is just a really nice way to interface with your transceiver that makes everything pretty smooth. But you do, and once you have a new transceiver, any PIEPS Black Diamond transceiver, you can register it automatically from this app. That doesn't give me the option here because mine's already registered. Yeah, that's pretty much it for that. You want to take it away, Mike?
Sure. So I'll not share the screen right now, but talk a little bit about recalls. I know more about recalls than I wish at this point, but it's interesting when you think of recall. At least when I thought of recall, it's, if your car gets recalled, okay, now I got to take it in, I got to get some part replaced, or something's malfunctioning, or so that's one type of recall when there's something wrong with maybe every single product that was out there, right? And that's the case with the Pro IPS, and I'll get into that in a second, that every beacon needed to be tweaked at some point. Some recalls are, we found something wrong with the let's say transceiver. We don't know how widespread it is. Check your beacon to see if it's working, and if it is, whatever the scenario is, then you don't have to worry about it. So that one's just kind of a, hey, check it out and let's see if you have one of the affected beacons. And then there's another type of recall that could be fixed merely with the firmware update. So that's one of the things that's really important that Angela noted. Register your beacon, because if you have one of those beacons, it will give you a prompt if there's a recall or some other information that you need to know. And some of that information is critical, like a firmware update or recall information. Sometimes it's just helpful information, like April 15th or whatever the date is, they'll send you a little note, hey, take your batteries out of your beacon so it doesn't cost you $500 for a new one when you corrode them. So recalls can be all over the board. Unfortunately, it's part of our world. Every brand has them. So it's important just to be aware of it. And if I think about, so the recall that we had with the Pro IPS, so what happened with this one is this antenna, we were concerned about the antenna. The mold was done, the plastic was done, and we were concerned about the antenna strength. So we used a different material. We infused fiberglass into the plastic, which made it much stronger. And then it passed all of our concerns from a durability standpoint. But what happened was, in all these molds, the housing molds, there's a certain amount of shrinkage when it comes out of the mold hot, and it shrinks a little bit, and then it should be to spec. So the battery compartment that we have with this beacon, we've used for years. It's always been great. But when we changed the makeup of the plastic and added glass to it, it shrank a tiny bit less, like 0.2 millimeters. So the distance of about 3 sheets of paper, that was all. It didn't shrink. And there's at least one battery brand that has batteries that are at the short end of the spec. And you put those two things together, and if you hit this beacon hard, there was a chance that it could turn it off. So we said, okay, we need all of them back, and we're just putting in a slightly thicker battery contact, and that takes care of the issue. So that's the nuts and bolts of the recall on this one. The beacon, other than that, is fine, and we haven't said anything about which battery brand it is that's shorter, mainly because we don't want people to go, oh, I'll just use the regular battery then. It comes with Panasonic, and I'll just use Panasonic batteries or whatever, because a year down the road when you go to replace the batteries, it's going to be, which was the brand that was short again? Was it Duracell? Was it Energizer? Was it which one? And then you put the wrong one in there and you have an issue. So that's why we're not saying what brand it is that's slightly short. We just want them all back. We'll replace that tab and it'll be good to go. So the good takeaway from me for the recalls is that if you do a proper beacon check at the beginning of your tour, it won't matter, because maybe you have a beacon that's affected by a recall. Maybe you have a beacon that's not affected by a recall, but it fell off the counter and you didn't even realize it. Or maybe your kid knocked it off the counter and put it back, and so you didn't even know it happened. And you get that out there on the tour, and you find out that it doesn't go into receive mode. So this was my big takeaway, and this is something that most of you, if you've taken a level 1 recently, are doing a beacon check correctly. But a lot of people do essentially half of a check, and this was the industry standard. And so all the old timers, the experienced people that have been out there for a long time, most likely are doing this incorrectly. We found that a lot of people were. And here's the way the beacon check used to be. When Angela and I started guiding, the group leader, whoever that was, guide or whoever, would say, okay, everybody turn your beacons on, and you'd go to each person. Okay, beep, 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 make sure that everybody's sending. And then you'd put your beacon away and you'd go ski tour. But there's a couple problems with this. You know, the goal back then, or the idea, was make sure A, that they have a beacon with them, and B, that beacon is turned on. Okay. But there's a lot more to it than that. The first thing you want to know is, A, is the battery life long enough to get me through this tour? So that's the first check. And then with that check, the old school check, where it's okay, beep, beep, beep. Okay, you're all sending, put my beacon away, and we go touring. What's the problem with that? Hopefully you guys are all going, well, the person checking knows that their beacon can receive, right? Because they checked each person, so they know they can receive a signal. And each of those 3 skiers knows that their beacon is sending a signal. But for me as the searcher, we don't know if I can send or not. I might put my beacon away and there's something wrong and it's not sending. Well, we missed that. And each of those 3 skiers that were sending a tone, we don't know if they can receive a signal. So you need to make sure that each of them can send and receive, so that everybody in the party can send and receive. And so when you're touring with that boomer in your group that just checks everybody's and puts it away, make sure you let them know there's a new standard out there, and you need to check send and receive for everybody. So let me share my screen real quick. Okay. So went through recalls. Proper check. One other thing I want to touch on, because I think there's some confusion out there, or at least lack of understanding on why to do a group check with the group check function. And I won't go into the nuts and bolts of how to do that with this beacon, because I'd like this to be more generic. And if you have a group check on your beacon, it's important to use that, because it does a couple things. It does more than just show that the beacon is turned on. So if you do if you just turn your beacon on and everybody else is in send and I put mine into receive, if I'm in really close proximity, it might pick up a signal that is out of the standard. And that's a problem. So group check not only checks that the beacon is turned on, but it checks that the pulse, the period, and the frequency are all within the standard. And you could miss that if you just turn your beacon on, or if it doesn't have a group check mode. Some people will say, oh, you don't need group check mode. But that's not true, because group check does more than just, it's more than just a simple way to check everybody's beacon at the trailhead. It makes sure that everybody's frequency is within the standard, that their pulse is within the standard, and that their period is within the standard. So if you have group check on your beacon, and ideally you do, or the next time you get a beacon, choose one that does have group check, because it matters. It increases the safety. Because if you do this and you're out of the standard, this will give you a warning and say, hey, that beacon is out of standard. So important to use group check mode. And this is that same picture I showed before, that just shows that, the timing and the distance of each of those, or the length of the time of each of those, pulse, period, and frequency, is important and critical to the performance. So that's all I got on that. Angela, I'll turn it back over to you for some frequency.
Sounds great. So electromagnetic interference, you've likely consumed some media and content about what this is and why it matters. EMI is what it kind of is referred to. And we're just going to go into a couple of different types of interference and the impact that it has in both send and receive functions, and how we can mitigate that if we don't have a transceiver that helps support that mitigation. So EMI it's noise. It's like, as Mike said, the 457 kilohertz, it's a radio frequency, right? So it has a certain wavelength with the periods and the pulse. But what EMI creates is unwanted noise, irregular electronic paths and circuits that interfere or suppress the radio frequency of the 457 kilohertz. The different types of interference that we have are active, passive, and environmental. Environmental, it's not like, it's not like elk or trees. Environmental would be more like, a ski lift, or if you're in close proximity to like a helicopter, or electronic field, a golf course. And this really matters if you're setting up some scenarios for doing transceiver drills. Mike and I have run into a few hurdles on golf courses with, we don't even know what was causing it, but some type of buried interference that was either electronic or irrigation related. What these do is they suppress the signal. And the types of active interference that we have these days, we're carrying a lot of interference. I mean, almost all of us, not just guides or ski patrollers, are carrying these satellite devices, a headlamp, smartwatches, radios, heated gloves, heated socks. Some of us are on snowmobiles. You know, all of this stuff creates certain wavelengths of noise that impact our transceivers function in both send and search modes. More passive types of interference.
Angela,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Your screen is not advancing. It's not in. We're
No?
on the very first slide.
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
I'm advancing. Which one are you on, this one?
No, we were on the one before that.
This one.
Yeah. So
Weird.
I don't know if you're
Let me
maybe
try
change
something
the
different.
mode.
Is that advancing now?
No, I wonder if
No,
we're
we
looking at
still
a
see all
different.
the slides on the side as well as the focus slide.
Yeah, do you have a second monitor that you might be that you're looking at, or
No.
hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, we're in the like edit mode still.
That's weird. Maybe let me look and see if my phone is hijacking.
Oh, that could be.
How's that?
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
Oh, geez. I have no idea.
Maybe click play from start.
That's what I tried earlier.
Hmm.
Is that advancing?
No.
No, we're still seeing the same thing. If you want, I don't know if it would work a little clunky, but Mike or I could share screen, could share your slides and see if it works better for us.
Let me just. You don't have my slides. How, do you want me to email it to you?
Yeah, that would work for me, and I can just pull them right up and advance through. It'll just take a second for me to download.
Okay, sorry, folks. Stand by.
Good time for a bathroom break.
Good time for bathroom break.
Also, if you have questions, you could start dropping those in the Q&A or the chat. And then once we get a couple stored up in there, then we can ask some questions once Angela's gotten through her presentation.
Okay, coming your way, Emma.
Okie dokie, standing by.
Had to be something to do with the phone.
Yeah, because it worked earlier.
Yeah. There's some tech to work out here.
Always.
Same. Thought I was all fancy with the phone.
You were.
I was there for a minute.
We're
That
still
was
impressed.
impressive.
Classic. So when you get that, Emma, you can just go to the slide 13, and we'll start again.
Perfect. Okay, just waiting for this to show up for me. There we go. All right, let me just open this. All right, is this the right slide to start on, Angela?
There you go. Perfect.
Righty. All right, you just give me the signal and I'll be ready to advance.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and next slide. Yeah, so we already went over some of this. Go ahead to the next slide. Talked about, this is like depicting kind of the noise that electromagnetic interference creates. So that frequency, which is the 457 kilohertz, can get suppressed by these erratic signals that are emitted by both active and passive sources of interference. So next slide. So we have active, passive, environmental, which we talked about. And, in the image on the right, you can see how a lunchbox, like a metal lunchbox or a camera, can suppress the signals and reduce the actual range of the flux lines. Okay, next slide. And just a photo of all the crazy devices that we're carrying these days. And heated gloves are some of the worst offenders. They can create up to 90% of reduction in range. So be real aware of that. Smartwatches are also, especially if they're connected to a heart rate monitor, like a chest strap, are also really strong emitters of noise and interference. And we just want to be aware of where these things are, especially in search mode. And as we're ski touring, make sure that we're not carrying something like this right next to our transceivers. And we have some rules of thumb here we'll go over. The 2050 rule that hopefully by now you all are very familiar with. Okay, next slide. And shovels, even chocolate. It's not actually the chocolate, but the foil wrappers in some chocolate bars. The Austrian chocolate seems to be the biggest offenders. Aluminum foil, heated jackets, any types of magnets. Like if you have some outerwear that has magnet buttons on it, and a compass can be affected, can impact all that. And then, snowmobiles or sleds. Okay, next slide. So a lot of research has been done on this, and it's very clear that interference is an issue for both transmitting and searching. And so the 2050 rule is basically when you are transmitting, any type of interference should be 20 centimeters away from where you're storing your transceiver. If it's a phone, if it's a GoPro, a Garmin device, a radio, whatever it is. So if you're ski touring and you're emitting a signal, 20 centimeters of separation is important. And that's one reason that the PIEPS IPS, the Pro IPS, has the antenna that goes out, because even inside of our transceivers, there's a lot of interference that it creates itself with the electronics. And so removing that antenna helps reduce some of that interference. In search mode, it seems like where a lot of the different devices struggle is managing the interference, and it's primarily in the longer ranges when we're picking up the signals, when we're in that kind of primary search phase, the signal search, where we'll get unstable signals, and your distance indicators will jump back and forth erratically, which indicates either ghost signals or unstable signals. So in the event that you're searching, it's critical that you not only turn your phone off or put it in airplane mode, you have to get it 50 centimeters away from that device. And ideally that goes into a back pocket or your pack. Same with radios, cameras, all these types of devices. And the 50 centimeter rule, it's been shown through tons of research and testing that mitigates the interference, although doesn't completely eliminate it. Next slide. I keep trying to advance it myself. larger devices like a snowmobile or a helicopter or even a phone when you're calling for help should be 10 meters away. So we've got 20 centimeters in send mode, 50 centimeters, half a meter in transmit mode, and 10 meters from any larger device, a ski lift, any kind of electronic towers, or larger chunks of metal. Okay, next slide. And then here you got to pop through these one by one. So takeaways, EMI is real. It can have a real negative impact on beacons both in send and search. Okay. It'll have its biggest effect during the initial signal acquisition with unstable signals. As you get closer to the transmitting beacon and its signal becomes stronger, interference usually has less of an effect, which is great. But what the problem is it increases the amount of time where we're actually fumbling at the beginning of the search where we're not getting a stable signal. And time is everything, as we know. And in search, when you're searching, you won't know if the buried victim, if their phone is right on top of their avalanche transceiver. So if it is, you're going to have interference issues with that sender's transmission, even if you're not getting any, if you don't have any interference yourself in search mode. I think there's one more. And then your indication that there's some type of interference, if you don't have a more advanced transceiver that actually manages interference very well, are those jumpy arrows, just irregular sounds, and just like erratic behavior through your transceiver. So that should just cue you to think, what type of interference might I have on my body, and get rid of it as quickly as possible. And that might solve your problem right there. Okay, next slide. So just a few plugs for the PIEPS system. It's the interference protection system, which is what Pro IPS stands for. Go ahead, next slide. This is what is known as like third generation technology. So first generation transceivers came out in like the early 60s, and they were all analog. And Mike and I are maybe the only ones here that learned on analog, where there was no digital screen, and it was just beep, beep, and you had to follow and reduce the sound so you could refine the resolution as you got closer. Now, fortunately, second generation, Gen 2 transceivers, which are transceivers that have digital screens and a digital sound. Some have analog sound as well. Those are the more pro advanced transceivers. That's considered generation 2. It's a 3 antenna transceiver that's got a modern screen. Now, generation 3 is absolutely new, and IPS currently is the only one on the market that's claiming to have a generation 3 bump up in technology. And you know, there's not a lot of money in building avalanche transceivers. There's not that many of us out there. It's a technology that works. It's very basic. And so there just hasn't been a lot of advances in technology here. But what's really kind of revolutionary about the IPS is that it detects interference, and it acts on that interference. So in send mode, if I'm wearing a transceiver and I'm buried and my phone is right on top of my transceiver because I just took a picture and put it in my pocket, chest pocket, what my transceiver automatically does is it boosts the battery power. It uses more battery power, but it boosts the signal back up to 100% immediately, which is remarkable to see when you're out in the field testing these different devices. And none of the other devices do this in send. Search mode. This is also unique, but not completely unique to PIEPS. The BerryVox will show you a reduction in range. So if I'm in search mode and I've got, you know, I'm doing my transceiver search with my transceiver really close to my body and my phone's close in my pocket, and I'm not following that 50 centimeter rule, my transceiver is going to go from what its maximum range is, which is 80 meters. It's going to start stepping down to 60 meters. And if it still detects interference, it's going to step down to 40 meters and then finally to 20 if there's significant interference. So what this does is it should cue me to know that I have interference. It's not interference coming from the emitting transceiver, it's from me. So I can mitigate that interference by trying to get rid of something, and that should bump the range right back up, because with greater range, we can get to a victim much faster, of course. But if you can't reduce that interference for some reason, perhaps it's environmental, then you have to reduce your search strip width based on what your transceiver feedback gives you. I believe the Berry box goes from 70 meters, which is its max range, just right down to 20. It doesn't do the step down. So they do have some technology that is mitigating the interference, but the resolution on this is just a little higher. And as I said, the extended antenna also reduces the internal interference. Also unique to the IPS is this dual antenna processing. And if you think back to Mike's illustration of the different, like the Y and the X antenna, and those antennas generally in search mode toggle back and forth because they're looking for the best coupling and the strongest signal in both orientations. And that it's a really pretty quick toggle from one antenna to the next. But what the IPS does is both the Y and the X antenna are looking for signals at the exact same time, which is unique on the market. So those are just a few things about this new transceiver on the market. Obviously, we're not here to sell you transceivers. We're here to just update you on the latest technology, and most importantly, make sure you feel really comfortable and familiar with your devices, and you take good care of them, and you do all the things to give them longevity. PIEPS still gets beacons back that are like 15 to 20 years old, and they do their best to go through all the checks and balances and make sure that that beacon still functions, and they'll send it back to the user if it passes the inspection. But it's really not, you know, it's not recommended to keep a beacon that's that old. And if it's that old, it's probably in any regard a Gen 1 or early Gen 2 transceiver. So that's all I got. Mike, do you have anything else to add on interference?
No, I think you covered it well. Yeah, I mean, I go back to the interference in send mode and why I think that the IPS is so nice is because, as you pointed out, if you're searching, you don't know that that person's signal has been compromised, and that means the range is shorter. So if you go on a standard search strip width that should work for your beacon, and they're out on the edge of the slide path, you could miss them. So that's the big thing. And if you miss them and you get to the bottom of the slide path, it's like, oh shit, no signal. That means they're back up there somewhere. And even if you have skins, if they're up 500 feet, you just lost your 15 minutes to save them. So that's why I think this is so important, this interference protection, and it's really unique. And because everybody, it's easy to blow it and start the tour off with your beacon up high in your harness and your phone in your pant pocket. But the phone comes out, you take pictures, it goes back in a jacket pocket, or maybe you don't even think about it. You eat a chocolate bar, you throw the wrapper in your pocket, and now it's right on top of your beacon. And so there's just so many things we carry with us that can cause a problem with beacon range, that if you have something that kind of protects you from making that mistake, it's super advantageous.
Super. Okay, next slide, Emma. Thanks. That's pretty much it. I don't know, Emma, do you have any questions? Anything you want us to add that you think is valuable?
No, I think you covered it really well, and I appreciate kind of the overview of the EMI. There's been a lot of conversation about that in the snow and avalanche world over the last couple years, and I also just want to kind of remind folks. We touched on this a little bit as you were talking about, when it's time to replace, and Angela, you pointed out that like these devices sometimes can last a really long time, and they're often still up to snuff, but all technology has a shelf life. We replace our smartphones every couple years. There's only so long your laptop has before it becomes a brick. And I think there's this feeling of like, but I feel like I just bought it and it is expensive. But when you think about the importance of this life-saving device, it really is important to make sure you're taking really good care of it so it can take care of you. And that ranging, 5, 7, 10 years, like at some point it's worth investing in a new device that's going to save your life. So just want to also remind folks of, I think when we talk about, how to take care of your transceiver, also knowing that eventually that will mean replacing your transceiver. And yeah, there's a lot of good information out there. There also is, and I'll send this out in my follow-up email, you can find beacon manual or transceiver manuals online where you can find out a little bit more about how to check, for those that don't have the handy dandy app, there are ways to check and see when you need to send in your device and how to get those software and firmware updates. So no, but this was really informative. I learned a lot and I spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff. So I really appreciate you both being here to give us that info. I'm just checking the chat one more time.
Let me add
Yeah.
to that just because your beacon is working and functional, if it's old, doesn't mean you should keep using it, right? I mean, you can still ski on a straight 205 ski, but none of us are. So sometimes
Totally.
technology, even if it's still working, it's time to replace it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you both. I'm looking in here and I don't see, I see a couple of folks just saying thanks for the information. And folks, if you do have questions, I'll send out a follow-up email in the next couple of days to everybody who is registered. If you do have questions, I can pass those along to our panelists and give their answers to this group. But aside from that, Mike and Angela, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. I have one shout out to
I love how
Daryl,
excited Mike is about transceivers.
because Daryl from the Cascades, from the Mountaineers, he just said, "Hey, I taught Mike a glacier travel and crevasse rescue course." This was in the early 90s. It was more than 30 years ago. So
All right.
Daryl, thanks for that. That was the launch pad of me becoming a mountain guide, was that course at the Mountaineers. So thank
Oh,
you. And thanks for
awesome.
tuning in.
Good blast from the past. That's pretty fun to have somebody show up on this panel. That's awesome.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone for piping in. It's great information and it's, there's always new info out there. If you want more information on the electromagnetic interference, Black Diamond on the website has a great article on some testing that we did out in the desert that highlights some of the interference issues. And if you just type in avalanche interference with transceivers, you're going to find all kinds of really good articles out there. There's been a lot of research lately. So dig in. Have a
Awesome. And
safe
I'll include a
winter.
link to that post when I send out the follow-up email as well. That was a great
Perfect.
article.
Yep, perfect.
Awesome. Mike and Angela, thank you so much. Happy holidays, everybody, and hope you all get to get out there and enjoy the snow.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. Have a great season.